Bradford's and stories. This seems a good time to review the Harpar-Crott exercise, which most of you have seen. I want to go into all this, the instructions in detail, the way I learned them. The importance of the Harpar-Crott principle doesn't really need to be restated here, and I will suggest that as this is not a canonical Golden Dawn exercise, you can possibly rope someone else into doing it with you without going into any of our things protected by the oath. It's very important that you don't try to do this if you haven't had sufficient sleep, if you haven't eaten. All that should be taken care of first. If you have a back injury, you might have to find another way to do it than what is described here. And if you have real problems with your eyes, maybe you should pass on this or again, come up with another way to fulfill the requirements of the exercise. This is referred to by the person who taught me as accelerated meditation and produces some very interesting results, certainly more than I ever got from things like TM or simpler approaches in a very short time. In the Far East, it's referred to as Tratak or Tratakam. It's actually a very old practice. The goal is to be able to do this calmly and solidly for a couple of hours. The first time you might want to do it for a shorter time, but I say set the alarm and dive in. In the end, you will not be sorry. So the first thing is how to sit. And I've referred to this as the Egyptian meditation position because you can find it in the statues. And often the things carved in stone were very important. For instance, all over South America, you find the chakmul. The chakmul is half reclining and turned and leaning on one elbow. And the inside story is the shamans and the adepts would go to sleep in that position. And having fallen asleep, half sitting up, the body would eventually lie back anyway, creating a split. And this was a technique for getting out of one's body. And I can say from my own experience, it's a viable technique, at least for some people. So it may not be that the Egyptians really used the common seated position for meditation, but I kind of think they did. So you would be sitting with your back straight, your feet flat on the floor, your palms flat on your thighs, and be still. And this is why we call it the Harpar-Crott exercise. The idea is to be physically still and internally silent. Now, this is done with another person sitting in the same position about 3 feet away. And the Tratak technique from the Far East is to maintain eye contact. What is allowed is normal blinking and normal swallowing. No breathing techniques, no meditation techniques, no mantras, no visualizations. Now, a certain way into this, you're going to begin to very likely see things. As certain chemicals in your eye are exhausted, everything starts to turn sort of purple and all kinds of, you may or may not see things that may or may not be there. You may see things about the other person. You may see the pictures that they themselves have in their head. This is not a visionary experience. You don't play with these things. You don't dive into them. You simply remain still and just be there. Now, what happens if you drift? Well, ultimately you will drift. And the idea is to just return yourself to the exercise. In some cases, people have certain emotional resistances come up, maybe memories you'd rather not think about. I cannot emphasize enough. The thing that turns this on will turn it off if you persist long enough. I'll repeat that. The thing that turns it off turns it. The thing that turns it on turns it off. This is very, very important. If you get a stiff neck during this, you may find that after a while it goes away, or it even moves to the other side as your back sort of, levels out. All kinds of things like this will come up. And writing them out is the point. It's like the opposite of what you might do in therapy, where you're encouraged to dive into your feelings and explore them and all that. This is the other, it's actually a human faculty to override these things. And we're constantly bouncing between that and indulging ourselves. Here, you consciously override these things. And the end phenomena of this exercise takes at least 90 minutes. Once you get towards the end, you're not really going to want to stop. I would recommend you find an alarm clock that is like the yoga alarm that just gives you a little gong or something, not one of those, oh my God, get up and run to work alarm clocks. I think that's fairly important. I'm just going to look through the original text I had here and make sure I haven't left anything out, because it seems I always leave something out.
I have a question, Fred.
Yeah.
In this time of social distancing, could you do this in a mirror rather than?
Well, we'll get to that in a minute.
Oh,
that's actually an important point, but we're going to get to it in a minute. I don't think I really have to go into what it means to just be there. But again, no mantras, no breathing exercises, no visualizations, no playing with the things you see in the air or any of that sort of stuff. It's just to perceive what's there and be still. It's the, upper point of the pentagram. And the stiller, that's not a good sentence. The more still, the better. So if your nose itches, too bad. If you have a cramp in your leg, too bad. Every one of these things will go away if you ride it out. And that is something you have to experience to believe. And once you can do it, you have a new level of inner strength, which is probably the other name we should have for these 4 exercises we've been calling the powers of the Sphinx. Also overriding, automatic impulses. Occasionally, you have an itch or something, you're scratching it before you even realize it. This is another battle that everyone has to go through at some point. Also, you may find that you're falling asleep. This can be a real battle, and it's a battle worth winning. The impulse to kind of withdraw because something is uncomfortable needs to be won at some level, and certainly can be won. Once again, the thing that turns it on will turn it off, and if you persist. So if the other person is drifting off into sleep, just maintain the exercise. At some point they will wake up and they'll be more awake than they usually are, and it's an interesting battle to win. It's akin, I believe, to lucid dreaming, and well worth digging into. The other thing that is not required the first time you do this exercise, but I would say really worth doing, is not blinking. Now, if you have problems with your eyes, you have dry eyes, maybe you leave that for another time, but it's really worth doing. To blink is actually to withdraw consciousness for a brief second. And in fact, there are meditation techniques built around this. In TM, they teach a technique where you have like a one-word mantra where it's eyes open, eyes closed, eyes open, eyes closed, and it's just repeated. What that really does, I won't go into now. Maybe another thing worth getting into, but here you're simply staying awake and focused on the person in front of you. Now, what will happen for sure? The glands around your eyes, if you're not blinking, will produce extra fluid, and they may even be a little sore later. That means the person in front of you may start having tears running down their face. Doesn't mean they're freaking out. It's just a natural thing to happen when you don't blink. Don't worry about it. I would give that a try. Now, this can be done with a mirror. Some of you live alone. You can't really do this with somebody else. We're going to remedy that in the next exercise, which can certainly be done over the net. We'll get into that later. I would certainly encourage trying this with a mirror if you don't have another option. But let me emphasize, this is not to be confused with the various magical mirror techniques where you're doing an evocation or something like that. If you're familiar with that technique, if you've been practicing that technique, how you separate and segregate these is a bit of a question. Depends on your level of control and focus. So if you get lost in that, don't confuse the two techniques. And if you're just starting out, best to do it with another person. There's a second level of this where one person is doing the exercise and the other person is coaching the exercise. So if somebody drifts a little bit, you stop and you tell them, you drifted, et cetera, et cetera. There'll be somebody who's got a leg going, or it's going to take them a while to settle in. So I would set the alarm clock for 2 hours and 10 minutes or something. The first couple of minutes are going to be all kinds of, smiling and being nervous and everything. That's the first thing to write out. Then the pain on your left shoulder, that's the next thing to write out. And then the drifting into, sleep, you got to write that out. And then if you have some emotional resistance or something like that, once again, the thing that turns it off, no, that's backwards. Hey, you're supposed to be, staying on me, but the thing that turns it on will be the thing that turns it off if you keep after it. And good luck. Next, we'll have the Tahuti exercise.